Married people? When did listening to your spouse lead to something completely unexpected? My wife Grace has this really annoying habit of eavesdropping on our neighbors' phone calls through the paper-thin walls of our crappy apartment building. I'm always telling her to mind her own business and stop being so nosy about everyone else's drama. Last Tuesday morning, she came running into our kit park while I was making coffee, completely frantic and out of breath. "We need to call the police right now," she said, grabbing my arm. "Mrs. Park next door is in serious trouble." I rolled my eyes so hard they almost fell out of my head. Grace has always been dramatic about neighbor stuff, making mountains out of molehills. Last month, she was convinced the couple upstairs was running a drug operation because they got a lot of packages. Turned out they just sold crafts on Etsy. But this time, Grace was different. She wasn't just gossiping or speculating. She looked genuinely scared. "No, you need to listen to me," she said, her voice shaking. "That wasn't Mrs. Park on the phone just now. It was definitely a man's voice, but he was pretending to be her, talking to someone at her bank about transferring money." I thought she was being completely paranoid. Mrs. Park is this sweet 78-year-old Korean woman who lives alone with her 3 cats. She's the type who brings us homemade kimchi and always asks about our families. The idea that someone was impersonating her seemed ridiculous, but Grace kept insisting something was seriously wrong. She pointed out that we hadn't actually seen Mrs. Park in 3 days, which was really weird since she has this rigid routine. Every single morning at exactly 7 a.m., she waters her plants on the fire escape. Rain or shine, summer or winter, she's out there with her little watering can. "Her plants are completely dried up," Grace said, pulling me to our window. "Look at them. When's the last time you actually heard her moving around over there?" Now that she mentioned it, I realized the apartment next door had been unusually quiet. Usually we can hear Mrs. Park's TV, her cats running around, her cooking in the kit park, but the past few days had been dead silent. Grace begged me to do a wellness check. I was still skeptical, but she was so worked up that I finally agreed to knock on Mrs. Park's door just to prove everything was fine. No answer. I knocked louder. Still nothing. I noticed her mail was piling up in a stack outside her door, which was definitely not like her. Mrs. Park always collected her mail immediately. I called our building manager, this grumpy guy named Bob, who hates being bothered, but when I explained the situation, even he agreed something seemed off. He came up with his master keys and opened Mrs. Park's door. The apartment felt wrong immediately. It smelled stale, like no one had been cooking or cleaning. Mrs. Park's cats were crying and their food bowls were completely empty. We called out her name but got no response. That's when we heard this faint tapping sound coming from the bedroom. Bob and I looked at each other and rushed toward the noise. It was coming from inside the closet. When we opened the closet door, we found Mrs. Park tied up with duct tape, barely conscious and severely dehydrated. She'd been trapped in there for almost a week, surviving on nothing but the small bottle of water her captor had left her. I immediately called 911 while Bob untied her and gave her water. She was so weak she could barely speak, but she managed to whisper that her nephew Danny had done this to her. Apparently Danny had been gambling away his college fund and owed money to some dangerous people. He'd been coming to Mrs. Park's apartment every day, forcing her to give him her banking information and then calling the bank while impersonating her voice to transfer money into his accounts. The police arrived within minutes and set up surveillance. Sure enough, Danny showed up about 20 minutes later carrying grocery bags, probably planning to keep Mrs. Park alive just long enough to completely drain her life savings. The cops arrested him right in the hallway. Mrs. Park spent 2 days in the hospital recovering from dehydration and exhaustion, but thankfully made a full recovery. The doctors said if we had waited even one more day to find her, she might not have survived. Danny had already stolen over $30,000 from her accounts, but the bank was able to reverse most of the transfers since we caught him so quickly. He's now facing charges for kidnapping, elder abuse, and fraud. Mrs. Park hugged Grace for about 5 minutes straight when she got back from the hospital. She kept saying, "You saved my life. You saved my life," while crying. Grace's annoying eavesdropping habit that I used to complain about literally saved our elderly neighbor's life. Now I actually encourage her to keep an ear out for anything suspicious in our building. Sometimes being nosy isn't such a bad thing after all.